And we're live. Welcome to Building a Learning Community, Episode 2. The second in this series, we'll take a look at fixed versus growth mindset. We'll discuss the pitfalls of a fixed mindset, how to cultivate a growth mindset, how to set challenging expectations, and how to aid students in achieving these goals, and how to give good feedback. Over the course of this series, we will provide you with the tools necessary to build a learning community at your own practice and a blueprint for how to use them. I'm your moderator, Maester Brigid, and I'm going to be guiding the conversation with these experts. And let's meet our panelists. Let's start with Gavin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Master Gavin. I'm a member of the Order of Defense in Callantyre, and mundanely, I have a doctorate in neurobiology, and I do studies of human mood disorders and brain injuries.
All right. Valbrand.
Hi, I'm Baron Valbrand. I've been fencing since 1992. Mundanely, I am a theoretical physicist with a PhD, and I spend a lot of time thinking about how things move and ways to make swords do things.
All right, Dante.
So I'm Master Dante DiPietro. I'm a Master of Defense and Master of the Laurel, and I have been a career educator for now going on 17 years.
Awesome. All right, well, let's get started. By the way, this is also, I'd like to introduce this additional panelist. It's Binks. Binks is obviously not going to leave me alone. I'm sorry. What is the difference? So let's get started. Tell me, what is the difference when we speak about a growth versus a fixed mindset? What do you mean by this?
Yes, I'll get this started. So this is sort of a psychological concept of how people think about developing skills and learning things in their approach to these. So these aren't just, oh, I think this thought, but this can be a fairly pervasive mindset about how things work. And so what we have is a growth mindset is a belief that a person can become better at skills through learning them, whereas a fixed mindset broadly believes on some level that natural attributes are why people are good at things, and that ultimately this ends up meaning that you can't really just learn skills to become good at performing them. And I think it's really important that while people might mentally say that second one seems absurd, it's how a lot of people internally think about growth, about how things work. And really that one, it doesn't reflect reality. And so in a way it is maladaptive.
Yeah, and an important distinction there as well is that the growth mindset isn't making the claim that with enough practice everyone can have the same levels of performance. There is no reality where however much I practice that I'm going to be an NFL linebacker. I simply don't have the attributes for that. But I could become extremely skilled relative to my size at football. The skill part can become equal across people, relatively speaking. The part that tends to, I suspect, contribute to those fixed mindsets are people not understanding the difference between being very skilled and having certain attributes that benefit those skill levels, if that makes sense. So so me and that linebacker situation could become as skilled with enough practice, as skilled as, an NFL professional. The NFL professional who has the body type for it is going to outperform me in a one-on-one situation, but skill and performance are not even the same thing. And in the SCA especially, we tend to conflate those two things. where they're really very separate things. And so
Right.
what we're looking at is developing skills, because skills are the things that you can control and plan for and grow over time. And
This
everybody
is
can
like
do that.
saying that guy he's just tall with long arms, but he actually has skill. Or saying, that kid's really fast, or they're really good, but they're just really fast. Like vice versa.
Right.
Like we're
Someone
mixing
someone
up skill versus physique.
right. There are people who are tall with long arms who are very poor fencers, and they do okay because they have those natural advantages. But someone who is an expert level with skill will mop the floor with someone who's merely tall and doesn't have the skills to support that. The natural aptitude really only the natural aptitudes like height or things like that really only make a difference when like the skill is close enough to being equal.
Yeah.
So
Valbrand.
there are two things that I wanted to touch on here. So the first is that most people don't have either a fixed or a growth mindset. They have some combination of the two, precisely because of this conflation between performance and skill. And this is a thing that can be very frustrating because you can see your own skill improving over time, but not see your performance as measured by some factor, let's call it tournament wins.
But wouldn't this be perhaps the example that Dante gave of the linebacker?
Yes, and this is. And it's similar, but not the same, because we have an objective measure of performance, right? So the linebacker has an objective measure of performance, which is how well he performs in a game against all these people. But that linebacker has a set of skills that he runs every day in practice. He's running the 40. He's hitting bags, doing tackling dummies, doing all these things, and these are skills that anybody can learn and anybody can master. Mm-hmm. But when you put that same person in a place to measure performance, right, where you are competing with other people who have been trained in these skills, right, then you have two things that are the thing that you're measuring. One is your actual net skill, and the other is your net skill plus your physical attributes. And I want to draw a distinction between natural talent and physical attributes, right? Because I'm one of those people who doesn't believe in natural talent, right? I do believe in physical attributes. Mm-hmm. Some people are tall, some people are short, some people are whatever, but I don't believe that there's sort of natural talent. There's some people have brought other skills that they have mastered elsewhere and have brought mm-hmm. that to bear, and we're conflating that as natural talent, right? And I think the most common part is when somebody walks into your SCA practice and has never done anything athletic in their life versus somebody who walks into your SCA practice who was a high school or college football player, right? That first person, you're going to have to teach them all these skills that high school or college football player already knows about how to be an athlete before you can get them to the point where you can have them matching the quote unquote natural talent of that person who's already an athlete.
And I think just to point out, like the concept of natural talent is like a very big checkbox stereotype example of fixed mindset.
Yeah.
But most natural talent is just practice that you didn't get to see happen. Here's a great example of this. If I were making a melee team, for example, for like the 5-man melee at Penzic, get me 5 college, like Division I soccer players and a big enough field, and I guarantee they can win the 5-man in with 6 months of training. And it's not because they would be talented. It would be because, they have all these other related skill sets and, athletic conditioning and so forth. But those are learnable things. You can train yourself to have good cardiovascular endurance. You can train yourself to have good field awareness. You can train yourself to be able to do all these different things. Those people would not be particularly talented at melee. They would just have done a sufficient amount of work prior to picking up a sword for the first time that would give them advantages over someone who hadn't done that work. But someone else could do that work. I could be out running 5 miles a day if I wanted to get my cardio up to, to where it would be like a cross-country athlete's.
Meet the cat. Okay. I'm gonna get us back on. Yes, you stay over there. I'm gonna get us back towards the main topic, because I want to get us to how do we cultivate this mindset. I feel like we've done a really good job explaining it, and people watching this might be like, okay, yeah, we understand, athletes, natural talent versus tall dude. So let's get into why the growth mindset's important and why the fixed mindset's harmful. So I'm going to start with the first one. Why is a growth mindset important? And Dante, you are listed as the lead on this one, so I'll start with you.
Well, so the at a fundamental level, if you want to believe that going to practice and that practicing in an effective way, according to the good methods that we've discussed, is going to work, you have to have a growth mindset. Because the belief that this is effort that will not be wasted, that it will bear fruit, is going to keep you, determined, motivated, dedicated, and allow you to really engage with and take part in that process of learning. We end up, very frequently falling out of that that perspective. And once you think that your efforts aren't going to benefit you, why would you continue to do them? So the real heart of the growth mindset and its significance is that it gives you a reason to continue.
I think one of the things that you wrote that really resonates with me is believing in improvement. And I think this is one of those things that's easy to say and being like, oh yeah, duh, we all want to believe that if we go to practice we'll improve. But I think we've all also had that moment where we're like, oh God, I'm not getting any better. What's wrong? I'm blah blah blah, and feel like you want to throw in the towel. And I think that we always need to keep a growth mindset through the course of our career, in a way.
Yeah. And I've got 2 good stories from my professional career to accompany that. One of them was I had one particular student who this was in AP classes, and she struggled throughout most of the year. Papers were graded on a 1 to 9 scale. She was very consistently getting 5s out of the 9, all the way through like January or February. So that that's potentially very discouraging. But one day, things clicked for her, and she started doing some of the best work she'd ever done. And like 2 months later, she took the AP test and got a 5 on it, which was the highest possible score. So, so she struggled without showing clear performance improvement, even though her skill sets were improving. She just couldn't get over that last hump. But once she did, she went from 5s to 8s and 9s. So sometimes it's just a matter of being willing to stick to it and to believe that the work will pay off, to see those benefits. And sometimes you just have to hold on to it long enough and put in the work. She was an incredibly hard worker, and had a lot of good dedication. And with all of my AP students, I would have them just before the AP test read the very first essay they wrote for me back in September of that same year. And the stark contrast between where they were when they first started and where they were now just a week or two before they had to take their AP test, they didn't realize the difference because it was incremental. They were writing a few papers a week. Those small bits and pieces aren't necessarily readily apparent, but then showing the contrast between this is where I started and this is where I am now, oh my goodness, tremendous confidence boost for all of them because they recognized the amount of growth that they've done.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Is like, here's where you were, and you're like, oh, holy crap.
Right. Well, sometimes this is one of my pet peeves, and one of many, I suppose, but yeah, I have a fair number of those. I will confess. But one of the things that always bothers me, and I think the growth mindset and cultivating one is really the answer to this, is in polling orders, a lot of times you hear someone say, so-and-so just needs to be more confident. And that's the reason they can't put their fight together in a satisfactory way, is they lack confidence. Well, to me,
Ooh,
that's
this is
sort
a
of
big
similar.
problem with getting women on
Yeah.
that list. They're like, oh, she is not confident. And I'm like, oh boy, don't let me unleash on this one.
And the reason people have confidence issues is if you're not training, if you're not seeing incremental improvement and growth, and if you're not being taught what to do, you can't be confident in what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's much more difficult. It's
You
like
have to
telling
build that
somebody
confidence.
right, confidence is earned. It's the same as saying to somebody to be more aggressive without telling them what to do to make that function properly.
Yes.
If I'm more aggressive but I don't know how to avoid getting hit, I'm going to get stop thrust a bunch, and my confidence is going to plummet.
Yes.
Nobody's confident after the 15th time they get hit in the face. I've been hit in the face 15 times in a row. It's not something that makes you feel like you're confident in your skills by the time it's over.
So here's, I guess, the thing that I want to bring up here is in this growth mindset versus fixed mindset, particularly with what you just said with respect to confidence. It's a difference between whether you're afraid to fail or you see failure as a learning opportunity.
Yep.
That's
And
a really good point.
that's the thing. If you're walking in and you're afraid to fail, you're afraid that you're not going to demonstrate that you have the appropriate skills, right?
You're afraid to learn if you're afraid to fail.
You're talking about you're coming at it from a point of view of this is what I have, not this is what I can gain from this, right?
Right.
So the growth mindset is, yeah, I'm going to go out and I'm going to fight Dante and I'm going to get punked in the face, but I'm going to think about it and figure out how and why he did and what I can learn from that so that he's not going to punk me in the face 15 times in a row, right? And if I'm approaching that as I'm going to go and I'm going to learn how to not get punked in the face by Dante, or, oh my God, I'm scared Dante's going to punk me in the face. One of those is going to be beneficial to me, and as somebody who is trying to cultivate and grow skills, and the other is, maybe going to seriously diminish my performance in a tournament and impede my ability to grow.
That's true.
So I kind of wanted to sort of tackle part of what you said there about, using failure as a learning opportunity, but also sort of to bleed into, I can read ahead and see what our next question is, on this idea of confidence and harm, right? So from a brain perspective, what our brains want to do is to perform actions that they can predict outcomes for and have the actions that we take be meaningful. And when the outcomes are arbitrary based on the actions we're taking, our brains don't like that at all, and it actually undermines our ability to be confident, which has a couple layers in here. Obviously, if we're using a growth mindset, we're trying to learn and we're focusing on skills, then we aren't trying to change the performance outcomes, which can be arbitrary relative to what we're doing. We're looking at outcomes that are the skills. Did I lunge correctly is something I can control. Did Dante stab me in the face while I did it is less in my control, especially as a learner, right? As a novice or earlier in my fighting career. And so where you can undermine your confidence if you're trying to, say, learn from your errors by jumping into a fight, is that you don't know enough to do that. And so losing is an arbitrary outcome, or winning is an arbitrary outcome from what you're doing, which will undermine you. And I guess the next part of, we talk about why the fixed mindset is harmful, is that if you don't believe you can improve, you don't even start from the basis that you are going to learn from errors and progress through skills, then you're essentially setting yourself up for nothing that I do matters. So that already creates a cycle that melts your brain.
It's just speaking from like brain, the brain is an organ in my skull. What is confidence to your brain? What is confidence to your body? Is that even a question that, did I ask something stupid or?
I mean, I think there are ways that people can define confidence. One is knowing that you have a good handle on the situation, you have the skills to perform what you need to perform, and a belief that your actions will affect the outcome.
Yeah.
Obviously, we just talked about, if you don't believe your actions will affect the outcome, then it doesn't matter what you do, and then of course you're not confident.
So you're going to quit or not even try.
All right, so you started on to the next question. Oh, did I cut you off?
No, I was going to jump in and dive right into the next question.
So the next question, keeping things on track for our viewers, is actually, how is a fixed mindset harmful? This is the flip side to that question. And Valbrand, you're listed as lead, so I want you to take it away.
So a fixed mindset is harmful because it is fundamentally rooted, in my opinion, in the sense that I am a deterministic individual that has a set of things, and what I can do is determined by that, and I can attempt to perform any given skill or task, and either I will be good at it or I will not. And if I am good at it, I will continue to pursue it. And if I am not, then I should take my coins and go play elsewhere, because I'm not going to be good at that. That's the real, to me, downside to a fixed mindset. And when you have this idea of, oh, you've got a lot of natural talent because you're tall and you were an athlete in college, or that's not natural talent. I spent time learning those skills. Yes, that height is a physical advantage, but the skills that go with that are learnable. And so what the harm of the fixed mindset is that it takes away that idea that you can learn and grow and become better at things that you initially face terrible failure at, right? And sort of the thing that I want to talk about is a way to overcome that is to understand that there is a very distinct difference, particularly in what we're here to talk about, which is SCA historical combat, is what does it mean to achieve victory versus what does it mean to be successful? And attaining victory on the field is not necessarily a measure of success. And the fact that those two things have been conflated is a real problem, because we say, oh, Joe Blow over there has won, 25 tournaments in a row, and, he's obviously the most successful person out there. He's the guy. And sure, he may have won a lot of tournaments, but the question for me is, well, how successful was he in executing his attacks, controlling his measure, defining his lines? Does he actually know how to use a sword, or did he just get lucky and beat people? Or
Any given Sunday.
Or execute things based on physical advantage or external skill set that is independent of rapier. See Dante's early example with respect to the melee team full of soccer players.
Well, one of the things that I try to impart to my students, and this is something that I used for myself as a growth tool, was to have two different metrics, one being victory and the other being success. And because I can win my fight with very unsuccessful fencing.
I think we all have done that.
I think we have all done that. One of
I'm so glad I won that, but I hope no one recorded it.
My personal favorite example of my own victory that was unsuccessful was the very first time I ever beat Adon Alwyn in a tournament was at Penzic, and he legged me, and I fell forward onto my face with my sword arm out and hit him on the way down. So I was victorious, but I hardly think that was an example of successful fencing.
I had a very similar one in the finals of a Rose tourney in the Middle Kingdom against Baron Adamsable. And
if you stick around long enough,
went down on my knees and good.
Yep. So I tell my students, I tell them to focus at practice on being successful, and then figuring out when being successful creates victory, rather than worrying about victory as a primary consideration. Because if you're just trying to win, you can train yourself to win ugly and your skills stagnate. But if you make it so you're trying to always lunge well, always, find the sword, always disengage effectively, all those different things, you just start winning because you start figuring out when to do those things. But if you get yourself in that binary win or loss, especially if you happen to be, the newer person at the practice, like maybe you're actually quite good, but you show up to a practice and just everybody else there is a veteran who's very much better than you. You may not have a concept of where you are versus the overall population. I ran into that problem myself. When I was a newer person, I was going to a practice that had a handful of very skilled fighters, and I didn't go to events because I thought I sucked. And then I finally went to one, and I was like, oh my God, I'm doing just fine. I had no concept of what the field was like.
I find that your conversation of victory versus success and winning sloppy is actually, to me, kind of the crux of why people say, oh my God, I'm in a plateau. How do I get past this plateau? Like, you have a fighter that gets to just good enough, goes out and wins a bunch of tourneys and is like, I'm doing great. but I'm not getting any better, and I don't know how to get myself past this point of being like a super cadet. How do I go from being a cadet that wins all the cadet tourneys but loses every other tourney, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, last time Dante had talked a little bit about, levels of expertise with his Dreyfus model, but I think it's really important to understand that the vast majority of people that you'll encounter are just advanced beginner level or less. So a fighter who is a well-practiced advanced beginner can actually reasonably expect to win 70% of their fights easily, and see that as success. And they have no process to get to winning 80% or 90%. They have no way to get there without rebuilding everything in its entirety, because they'll get all that feedback that I win a lot, and they're beating
top dogs.
but they have no, they can't, it's not that they can't beat the people that are better than them. They don't even have a process to improve.
Yeah.
And that leads to plateaus of where people are thinking of their performance, because they got as good as what their habits are will allow them to.
This is where I point out as moderator, the advanced beginner and other terminology is in the first episode, and there's a good link in the YouTube video for those who would like to learn more about what Gavin just referenced.
I think we'll be talking a bit more next episode too about it.
Awesome. Is there any more on the growth mindset importance or the harmfulness of fixed mindset before I move on to the next?
Yeah, so I wanted to bring up one more thing, because there's this thing that a lot of people talk about, that I hear all the time, which is the folks who come up and say, well, what is your victory condition today? It's not necessarily beating Dante. My victory condition might be Dante doesn't punk me in the face, right? And so if I can sit there and organize my fight in such a way that I can demonstrate my own success in a way that can help me have this growth mindset, right? Because I am looking at success in terms of building and developing and executing skills, as opposed to having this arbitrary binary win-loss thing that says, if you win, you're doing great, and if you lose, you suck, and you should just go home. Right?
Well, that's an excellent segue to. Or I'm sorry, did you have more?
Nope, that's I was kind of teeing it up for that segue, actually.
Okay, perfect. Well, expertly done.
So what do we do about this? How do we cultivate a growth mindset? How do we learn to accept ways that we can grow ourselves and measure our own success and help ourselves with expectations?
So there are a few different things here, and they touch on what Gavin and Valbrander have been talking about here. When it comes, if you set good goals for yourself, and those can be challenging, those expectations can be challenging, and they should be challenging. They should push you to do something that is a little bit out of your reach at first, that you have to grow into. If you set yourself up for winning or losing as your goals, that's setting a goal that you don't actually have control over. Yeah. Because if you and I are fencing, saying, I want to win as a growth goal, it's out of your hands to some degree, because I'm actively going to try to negate what you're doing to achieve that goal. Right. It's the same sort of thing as saying, like, my goal is to become a white scarf, or to become a master of defense, or to become a laurel or a knight or whatever. You don't actually have control over that. You can control what you do to make yourself a good candidate, but you don't have control over that outcome. So if we're trying to cultivate a healthy mindset, we want to focus on things that you have control over. So you set yourself a challenging expectation, but it needs to be something that is within your power to complete, independent of anyone else, independent of what your opponent is doing. So whether I lose or not, or win, I can set the goal of, right now what I'm working on is every time I do a disengage, I also connect that to a measure change. Um, I want to be either turning my disengage into a forward attack or turning my disengage into breaking measure to stay safe. And that's something that I can control. My opponent might negate what I'm trying to accomplish with that, but they're not going to prevent me from doing it. So it's a challenging expectation because it requires a whole bunch of different things to happen at once. It's an extremely useful habit to develop, but it's within my control. And win or lose, I can say I did this 100% of the time, so that's what my goals were for that. And when students are working on those types of specific things, we can support them in achieving those types of goals through effective feedback and effective resources. And appropriate feedback for those types of things is in the form of descriptive statements.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, sure. So I can say to someone, when you are lunging, you are bobbing up and down. That is giving me information that you're about to do something and giving me warning. So you've got a tell there, and here is what you could do instead or differently to prevent that. So it's what to do and how to attain the outcome that's desired, which is to not have the tell.
How do you know how to give, like for someone who's trying to give feedback and isn't giving successful feedback, like how do you help them understand what is appropriate feedback? Like it's obvious to you, but we're trying to also help people learn how to do this.
So this is actually a common problem that the proficient and expert individuals often have in giving good feedback, is because if you have two experts who are fighting and they're like, hey man, what happened? It's like, oh, I just moved your guard over a couple of inches and I hit you. The expert then sits there and replays the entire thing in his mind and goes through the entire sequence and sees, at this point, they leveraged their sword in this particular way, and it opened my line, and then they came in and hit me. Sure. The feedback that we got is, I moved your hand over a couple of inches, and I hit you. That's not helpful to somebody who doesn't have the ability to replay the entire thing and do all of that mental processing, and replay everything to see, there's where I screwed up. Okay, sure, fine. Now I have the toolkit to go and say, okay, I can now look for that and improve that on my own. Good feedback is of the form of, okay, here's what happened. You gave me the opportunity to take this measure, and I leveraged my sword to open your line. And this is how I did it. This is what you should see when I'm doing it. Now, when you see that, this is the action that you take to counter that by re-leveraging your sword on top of mine, making sure that your line is closed, and then extending to counter the action, right? It comes in that form of, here's the thing, you need to see the thing, here's the action that you can take to counter the thing. Now perform the action. Now you have the direct feedback of, this is what you saw, this is what you should have seen, this is how you should respond, and you've now successfully performed that, right?
I like
And
that there's a lot of steps in there. It's kind of like Dante's, oh, you just need to be more aggressive. Well, what's that even mean? You know,
right.
or
It,
don't
it,
get
it, has,
hit,
it has
but
to be
thanks.
concrete, verifiable, and this is what you can do.
Yeah.
To fix it.
Yeah, it's good feedback describes a process to arrive at the desired outcome. Bad feedback just states the outcome. If I say to somebody, "Oh, just keep your sword free," well, that's the outcome that I'm after, and that's advice. But if you don't know the process for doing that in context, then you run into what Gavin was talking about earlier of feeling like, feeling hopeless because you're getting input that's ultimately meaningless and frustrating and feels like, I'm trying to do stuff, but what I'm doing is leading to arbitrary results. So good feedback is all about providing a clear process to achieve the desired outcomes. And that's a critical part of cultivating a growth mindset, because when you make the process explicit, the process becomes replicable. And the replicable process achieves the desired outcomes. And that gives us the ability to say to our students, not just, hey, good job, you kept your sword free, but hey, good job, you did this, you did this, you did this. Keep those specific actions that are part of this overall process up. And that shows that the overall goals that you're setting can be attained, because each one of those pieces of the process are all obviously attainable. If I say to somebody, oh, when you're doing your disengage, do it by relaxing these fingers, letting your sword fall, and then bringing them back up. Anyone can do that. There's no fencer out there who can't do that. But keep your sword free is way more involved and vague. So if we stick to those processes, we can say to somebody, hey, your disengages are getting really good because you're doing this thing that I said to do. And it's working for you. So they're going to keep getting back to doing it and practicing it more and building more and more of those individual components together into an overall whole.
In this way, we're celebrating students' successes and showing them that they have achieved their goals.
Yeah, and I'm sure Gavin can tell us just what that does to somebody's brain when they start to have those successes and repeated affirmations of success.
Well, Gavin.
Well, so I did want to just reiterate, go back through this list since we said each part and talked about it for a while. This how to cultivate a growth mindset is actually how a lot of other learning problems get addressed in psychological research too.
Okay.
And this is a fairly well-studied body of suggestions, so it's not just Dante and Valveran sitting here making up stuff. But just to set them explicitly again, 1, you have to set challenging expectations for your students and express that you believe they can meet those challenges. Okay? So you're not setting impossible tasks. They're challenging but reasonable. And you tell your student you have confidence in them, and you express that. 2 is you have to actually show them what to do to get there, right? So actually teach them. 3, we've just been talking a lot about feedback. It has to be meaningful. It has to relate to what you taught them and what they understand. And then 4, you have to go back and celebrate their successes, point out when they succeed. As well, feedback isn't always, well, you screwed up your lunge and died. Sometimes it's, you formed that counter guard really well. All you need to do from there is extend and hit them. That also is a success, and that's part of feedback. But yeah, once you start building this pattern, you iterate through it. And so you learn, and then you build confidence by learning to do one more thing, and then one more thing, one more thing. As opposed to, I think, actually, Dante, I didn't even use the term, but earlier you said helplessness, and the process that the fixed mindset creates is something we call learned helplessness. That is a term that exists in psychological research. That is actually a way that we model depression and anxiety disorders in rodents. So like that kind of, I think, is important to bring it together. I did want to just talk a little bit more about the challenging expectations, though, because I think it's hard to think about what that is without examples. I think a really good example of this kind of breaking down your expectations is the Couch to 5K program. If you're not familiar with this, this is a training program for people who, like me, prefer beer more than running. And
I'm in that category.
And really weren't athletes to begin with at all. And what it starts with is 1 minute of jogging, and then you take a rest, and you jog for a minute, and you take a rest, and then you jog. And you do this like 8 times. The first week you do that 3 days, which there are certainly a number of disabilities and such that you may need to start with less time than that or make modifications. But a lot of people can do a minute of jogging, even if they're not particularly in shape, at a time with some breaks. And then the next week it moves to 90 seconds. And the week after that, it moves to 2.5 minutes, right? So it's adjusting the expectation as you accomplish each subsequent goal. And that's really the way you have to build that for your students as well, and not just go, all right, we're gonna go run a 5K today, it's day one.
I like that with incremental goals and incremental things. That's part of why I actually hired a professional trainer at one point, because I just didn't even know how to start. Like, I didn't know what to do. Hire a pro.
Indeed, that's the really important thing, is that you need good teachers, right? The average, as Gavin pointed out, right? On the order of about 70-odd% of the people that you're going to encounter out there fighting are advanced beginners or less, right? And those people don't have the skills necessary to perform that self-analysis and say, what am I doing wrong? How am I doing it wrong? They don't have enough of the skills necessary to perform that self-analysis that I was talking about in my example, right? I go and I fight with Dante, and I'm like, hey man, what did I do wrong? And he's like, I moved your hand over a couple inches. I'm like, okay, right? He and I have the ability to sit and unpack that, and I can directly trace out where in the fight he did that and how he did it and what he did. And an advanced beginner or somebody who's even, just in the starting stages of competence doesn't have the skills to do that. Those are separate advanced skills where, you have that ability to self-reflect and intuit what's going on in a fight. And so if you are at that advanced beginner level or at the start of competence, then you need to be seeking out good teachers who can do that analysis and show you what you're doing wrong and give you valuable feedback in an appropriate way that is going to show you, here's what I'm doing, here's what skills I need to work on in order to improve this thing. And that's how you get through plateaus, right? Anytime you're at a plateau, 90, in my opinion, 90-odd% of the time, it's because you need to change something about your instruction.
I remember at one point in time, I was at the Boston practice and I was fighting Master Donovan of the East. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, what am I doing? And he's like, oh, your line opens up about this much here. And I was like, okay, I'll be right back. And I went over and I fenced someone else for like 15 minutes and I came back and I was like, all right, let's go again. And he's like, oh, you fixed it. I'm like, oh no, I'm sure I've got something totally different now. but you told me what it was. And I said, oh, okay, cool. Let me go work it out for myself. and I'll come back.
And again, but that's because you are certainly an expert, and you have the tools to unpack that and go to town. Whereas, and you know, Donovan also being an expert, the two of you can talk about it that way, and that's perfectly valid feedback for you. That's good feedback for you because you can then go and figure it out and do the thing.
Yeah.
What we're trying to point out is that's not good feedback for an advanced
For most
beginner.
people. Yeah.
But for most people, right? And so so you need somebody who is, you know, proficient or expert, who can sit there and look at the place you as a student, advanced beginner, novice, whatever, are, and provide good direction on how to perform the skills that you're performing incorrectly.
All right. Well, I believe we're at a good point to probably wrap this up. So I'm going to ask if any of you have closing remarks or conclusions before we call this an episode.
Speaking of having the right skills at the right levels, the subject of our next episode is going to be, what are the skills that fighters should be developing at each level of skill: novice, advanced beginner, competent, proficient, and expert.
Mm-hmm.
So
all right.
tune in next time for more on that.
Tune in for more. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for our dear watchers for sticking it through. And we'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.